I learned quite a long time ago not to trust my own feelings. In fact, one of the very first things I learned was not to trust feelings. And that was through observing how my mother and father didn't get along. I think as soon as I became capable of conscious thought, I could see there was something not right here. This man and this woman were living together, they got married, and yet, clearly, were not happy with each other. I remember asking my mother why she married my father. My mother was about 10 years younger than my father. Maybe not relevant, but perhaps it was because my mother was very young, and she replied, because I was stupid. Because she was stupid. I can't remember asking my father. I might have done. There was never that much opportunity to talk to him. Because he was usually at work, drunk, or sleeping. But he might have told me once that he loved my mother at the time they got married. And this made me think, you can love somebody, you can marry them, and then it can be a disaster. So we obviously have to be very careful with this feeling of falling in love. And it was a feeling I was particularly susceptible to. I was always falling in love. I was falling in love to a crippling extent, to the extent that I couldn't talk. I couldn't even talk to the one that had inspired such feelings. As I got older and managed to overcome that, it occurred to me that I tended to fall in love with women that were particularly difficult, that were perhaps a bit unstable in certain ways, if not downright mad. This seemed to be my predilection. So I had this very powerful feeling, which I could see was going to take me into some very difficult territory. I had to be very careful with this feeling. Ignore the whole romance of this feeling. Ignore the intoxication of this feeling. Because I could see how it was going to take me into disaster. The first book that I explored on this channel was the epic text known as the Yoga Vasishtha. I first heard of the Yoga Vasishtha many years ago when I was at an ashram in India. It was Sai Baba's ashram. Sai Baba's dead now. I'm not quite sure what his legacy is, but Sai Baba was regarded as one who taught the way of bhakti yoga, devotional yoga. And it wasn't something I was particularly comfortable with. What passed for devotion amongst the devotees was the most dreadful display of simpering infantilism. I remember having a little chat with somebody about this in the dorm, the big dorm, that was a big hall that I was staying in at the ashram. And he said, well, perhaps the way of devotion is not for you. You need the way of jnana, the way of the mind. You can get to liberation through stories, through thinking. I'm not quite sure that's how he put it. And so apparently it was Sai Baba himself who recommended the Yoga Vasishta. And sure enough, there it was in a 2-volume set in the ashram bookshop, or it might have been a local bookshop. And this was far more appealing. Let's have a look at the next verse, because all of this is a kind of preamble up to it. Verse 846. To say that the passions are quieted and destroyed, apart from right reasoning and scriptural teaching, is the view and discourse of the philosophers, which is not to be practised by the intelligent. So I hope you can maybe see where I'm coming from and where this verse is coming from. To say that the passions are quieted and destroyed. And this is what we understand spiritual practice to be about. Passion for the world. We want this passion to be quieted and destroyed. And there's lots of meditation practices you can do. There's lots of ethical practices you can observe. But the point here is that you need right reasoning and scriptural teaching. It isn't a question of just getting on with your practices, getting on with leading a spiritual life. We need to look at our understanding. We need to look at the assumptions that we make with respect to the world and with respect to ourselves, because these assumptions are fundamentally limiting. And there are many that we have in our modern mindset in which this is so. One that comes to mind is the belief that awareness is somehow a function of the brain. An epiphenomenon is sometimes described as. This is a very limiting belief, and it needs to be examined and challenged. And it's been one of the threads on this channel through the different series of videos. But I hope it's obvious if you can see how limiting this is, because awareness, the very awareness that is hearing these words, is the doorway to enlightenment. But if you believe that awareness is simply part of the functioning of the body-mind, then you cannot appreciate this. But it seems to be an assumption that many of us would automatically make. Another assumption is that there's an external world out there. Most spiritual teachings are about creating a nice space for yourself in this world. Maybe create a nice ashram, a nice community. Change society for the better. It's a real minefield, that. But if you start taking your cue from the world in terms of your practice of spirituality, then you've missed the point, you've lost it. You're limited in how far you can go. A lot of people see spirituality as about getting high in some kind of way. In fact, I'm quite impressed through my experience on Facebook about how many people seem to have some appreciation of this awareness. this teaching that's being presented here in this channel is actually very widespread. And there might be some teachers who are presenting the same wisdom, the wisdom of awareness. But I'm not sure there's that many that challenge the existence of the external world, that challenge the existence of an external world. It's a limiting assumption. We are limited by this belief in an external world. And as I said, there are some people that think spirituality is about getting high in some way or another, about being very positive. Again, we need to examine this. Is this not about just getting into a good mood? Is spirituality therefore about just getting into a good mood? Again, we're letting our feelings take over, and we're not questioning our feelings. If you feel happy, then that's it. You've cracked it. Well, this verse is telling us otherwise. It's telling us to bring in the mind, observe, apply right reasoning, and resort to scriptural teaching. Scriptural teaching, as it's presented here in the Lankavatara Sutra, for example, goes very, very deep. It goes beyond our ups and downs. It goes beyond our sensibilities. People that regard themselves as spiritual, they're actually indulging, in many cases, they're indulging their own sensibilities, their own sense of aesthetics. Some would even regard their pronouncements as almost like holy writ, because their intuition has been developed to a high degree. You've got to be very careful with this. Basically, it's ennobling prejudice. Spirituality is not about acting on intuition. It's not about giving credence to your sensibilities, no matter how fine they are. You don't trust your feelings, even spiritual ones. You need to ask yourself where these feelings come from. Are they simply part of your sensibility? Is it not that you're simply getting into a good mood? So we need to be careful with all of this, and we need to examine the assumptions that we make. Our assumptions about the world, our assumptions about me as an ego soul, which is covered in the next verse, and about our understanding of spirituality. I think most people are content with the idea of spirituality as being positive, caring about the world, caring about your body. I've had to stop following certain news feeds on Facebook because they tend to be whipping you up into a bit of a frenzy. You know, going out to protests about things like fracking or all the foods that you're supposed to eat or not supposed to eat. My goodness, it's really trying to wag your tail. There seems to be an undertone of hysteria to it all. Fracking may be a bad thing or it may be a good thing, but the thing is, you don't get a balanced viewpoint, you don't get a balanced perspective on it, and I tend to avoid those that take a somewhat hysterical tone. So, that's all to do with the world. And you can engage with the world however you like. But don't call that engagement spiritual. There's nothing spiritual about engaging with the world. Because you're going along with an unexamined assumption. And that assumption is that there is a world out there, and there's an individual here experiencing that world through the senses. And this is an inherently limiting assumption. It's spiritually limiting. And if you're really interested in spirituality, if you're really interested in going deeper, then you'll seek to transcend that assumption. And not only that assumption, but all the other assumptions that your feelings will incline you to accept without criticism.